I was kind of scared. I was like, I was a little bit intimidated. I'd done it with my own children, yet taking that step with someone who was maybe 15, 20 years younger than me, but a grown adult, it felt a little scary. And so while expert culture is important for some things, surgery, yes, engineering, I would not want to work on a car engine, or, I could not be a chemical engineer. But there's a lot of things in life that we can do. And for sure, one of those things is to help one another trust and follow Jesus.
Renee Sproles, welcome on to the podcast here with Into the Harvest. It's a privilege to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
You and I met a few months back. We were at a Discipleship.org conference in Nashville, and I was able to sit into some of the workshops that you were teaching. You also spoke from the stage, and really appreciated a lot of what you had to share and your insights, especially around the topic of making disciples, being ordinary people who are sharing our faith with those younger than us, or if you're younger, learning from an older believer. And so that's what we are going to talk about today. But maybe just by way of introduction, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're currently at in the world, and a little bit about your background.
Sure, I'm happy to. My husband, David, and I have been married 31 years. And we have two children. Emma, she's married to Thomas Goodwin, and they just had their second little girl. So we have two granddaughters from them. And we have a son, Houston. He's married to Caitlin. They've been married 3 years now. And I was a homeschool mom for many, many years, and then moved into, by God's design and providence, into a position at our church where I worked with our senior pastor for about 5 years. And that was when our church was kind of really learning about discipleship and kind of pushing it out to the church at large. And we kind of learned along the way what it was. And I was really confused. It's really simple, sort of like parenting. It seemed really hard and complex. And as you do it more and more, so many things just kind of from your experience seem like second nature. So that was my first experience with it. Our church, North Boulevard Church in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, was mentored by Bobby Harrington at Harpeth Christian Church in Franklin. And if you're familiar with renew.org at all, which is a sister organization to discipleship.org, he heads that up as well. And so I've been surrounded by really amazing people who know what they're doing and who have a lot of good resources for us. But I just kind of jumped in there as a function of my job, and then really just kind of fell in love with it.
I want to go back to something you said there. How far along, I guess, in life were you when your church there began to make this shift in focus and really try to move forward with more of a discipleship emphasis? Do you mind sharing, how long ago was that?
Oh, not very long ago. It was maybe 8 years ago, 7 years ago. So mid the teens. We knew small groups, but we didn't really know discipleship. And they're similar. It's like a Venn diagram. There's a lot of overlap there. But it's not been that long at all. I don't know if we were late to the game or not, but yeah.
I think it's great. I think we have many people who are probably listening or watching this today who have sort of seen discipleship and disciple making from a distance, or maybe they've just begun to hear about it. They've been part of a faith tradition that wasn't necessarily an emphasis. And so hopefully your story and some of what we talk about today can encourage folks like that it's never too late to start. Something else you said that I just wanted to loop back to, you related making disciples to parenting, and specifically in the sense that you don't really know what you're doing. when you get started. And I think that's actually by design. The gentleman who was spent 7 years discipling me in my 20s, I still remember that was one of the ways that he described it. He once asked me this question. He asked, do you know when you're ready to be a parent? He said, when you're in your late 40s and your youngest child moves out of the house, and you have a moment you can step back and say, if we had a kid right now, I know exactly what I would do from A to Z. And then biologically, it's interesting. God has set it up so that that's right around the time that you can't have kids. I mean, it actually becomes impossible to have kids. So there seems to be something to this where we feel like we have to have all the answers in order to get started, whether that's at parenting or at making disciples. And yet God seems to have set it up differently.
That's really beautiful. I hadn't thought about that. I always think of it in terms of homeschooling because, if we were teaching a new grade every year, a couple of new grades every year with our two children. And so if I felt like I had to have all the lesson plans and years of experience with the lesson plans, I could never do it. There's so much that I had to just do alongside them and maybe just be one or two steps ahead of them. And so, I think that maybe took some of the fear out of it for me, although I had a lot of reservations, even so.
I want you to share just a little bit more. We are going to get into the main theme of today's conversation, which is discipleship and disciple making. But you actually, so from a distance, I'm fascinated by your life story because you were a homeschool mom, but I would say it seems to me that you've almost had a second career here and a pretty amazing one. So you're an author, a published author of multiple books. You're a podcaster, and we'll have links to Renee's podcast and also her books. But even though discipleship seems to me to be at the heart of who you are and what you're giving your life to, you have some other interests. You also work with renew.org. So can you tell us a little bit more about your work these days in those different areas?
Yeah, I mean, it's totally God's doing. He kind of opened those doors. As I said, Harpeth Christian Church was working with our church. And at the same time, our senior pastor and Harpeth's senior pastor kind of helped launch Renew. And after about 5 years at our church, my husband and I said, I think it's time for something else, but we didn't really know what the something else was. And so Renew said, hey, will you come do some writing for us? Maybe a little bit of like workshop classes and things like that. And so I did. And they said, will you write a book? The senior pastor of our church, David Young, who has a PhD from Vanderbilt. Will you and he write a book on gender together? And so I started. He said, you go first and you give it a go, just get your thoughts down and then I'll take it from there and we'll read it. And when he read the intro, which is a real personal story of my just experience with gender in the church versus gender in my home and in my marriage, he was like, oh, no, I can't write this with you. This is your story. Mm-hmm. And so he was like, you finish it. So I wrote the first book on gender, which is just a short little 3-chapter book, and what it means to be male and female in the church and marriage and in God's design. And then that kind of set us off on a journey. Things got real weird in the culture with gender. And so Renew just used me for I was interviewing. I always say I interviewed the smart people and wrote for people like me, who's just a regular person. I was trying to make it accessible. All this great research they've done, all this thinking they've done about the scriptures, and to try to make it accessible to all of us. And so that ended up being 12 or 13 article series on Renew, really in-depth articles, which turned into another book. We took some of those, and I became the general editor of Male and Female, which is the second iteration, and is much more a resource. You can read it cover to cover. It's written in a coherent way, but it's also meant to just be, if you have a question about a particular topic, go to that chapter and it can stand alone. So that was kind of how that happened. It really is just it's really just God's doing. It's not really what I saw myself doing this season of life, which is why it's so exciting to walk with God.
I was going to say that's one of the themes that I sense from your life is just a willingness to be available to God and to step into new and unexpected places as he leads you to do that. I know when you had sent over a little bit of your bio and your background, you guys have been teaching within your local church for 25 years, and you just shared that you've been married for 31. So for most of your married life, you all have been sharing with others, particularly around these topics of following Jesus, building a godly marriage, raising children. And I think that that's actually a piece of what it means to live a life of discipleship, is just to be available and to serve, and then to step into new chapters as God opens those doors. So thanks for sharing that a little bit. Like I said, I'm going to have links to renew.org and discipleship.org, Renee's books, because there's a lot more that she is involved with right now than just what we're going to talk about today. But I do think what we're going to talk about today is at the heart of all of it, which is this conversation on discipleship. So why don't we shift to talking about that, Renee? And maybe a good starting point would just be to define what do we mean, or what will we be referring to when we're talking about discipleship? Do you have just a go-to explanation of what that word means?
Yeah, I would say discipleship at its heart is helping someone else to trust and follow Jesus. And you can actually define it in secular terms, because a disciple would be just someone who comes alongside you and trains, right? Lives life with you and learns how to maybe gain a particular skill that you have, or gleans from your expertise. So that's my definition, just helping someone to trust and follow Jesus more deeply. And that can be everything from introducing them to Jesus and they don't know the Lord, all the way to taking them from childhood faith to teenage kind of faith to adult kind of faith to grandparent, where they're passing it along.
There's so many parallels between our spiritual lives and our physical lives, and that's because scriptures present us with that kind of parallels. Like even Jesus, when he described what it meant to enter the kingdom, he described it as birth. There could have been a lot of words and terms that he used, pictures that he used, signing up or enlisting or joining, or even converting, but he described it as being born. And then the parallels really go from there in terms of, we're born into a family. There's a whole process of growth and maturity that needs to happen. And so when I think of discipleship, now I split this, I parse this maybe a little bit finer, but it's just because it helps me understand it. So when I think about discipleship, I think about living a life of devotion to Jesus. So in my mind, discipleship is the lifestyle of a follower of Jesus. And disciple making is passing on that way of life to the next generation. And Jesus has called us to both. He's called us, as his people, he wants us to live these lives of devotion to him. But he also wants us to share that with others and to help the next generation learn who Jesus is, learn how to follow him, and learn how to share their faith with others. And yet,
I like your definition better. It's actually good. I like that because you're right, because it is us with the Lord and us with one another. That's really beautiful.
I think most people resonate with that first one, which is like, well, yes, I do need to love the Lord with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, which is just kind of another way of saying discipleship. That when you're doing that, you're living a life of discipleship. But the idea of passing on our faith or being directly involved with helping someone else can be very intimidating, or it may be something that many people have never even considered they're responsible for. I listened to one of the episodes from your podcast, Just Ask Your Mom, and you talked about how two cultural forces that prevent this maybe from happening is, one is we have this respect for experts. So we feel like if something's really important and really complex, leave it to the experts, because, you know, we don't want to be in there. Like, I would never perform surgery. I just wouldn't take that on. I think sometimes we have that same mindset towards passing on the faith, that it's very important and it's very complex. Therefore, surely God would not expect me to be involved in passing it on. So how have you dealt with that in your own life, and how do you help others who might be feeling that pressure?
I think I was inoculated against it when I began homeschooling. When you even in kindergarten, first grade, you realize, like, okay, there are some best practices here, but it is actually something that I can do. It was really hard, and I was very clumsy with it in the beginning. And like anything that's new to you, it's hard until it's not, right? That's what I always used to tell my kids in homeschooling when they would be frustrated learning something new. Well, it's only hard till it's not, you know? And so I think I learned that, you know, way back in 2005 when we first started homeschooling. But yet, when my kids were grown and I felt like, okay, now I can really start to pour into these young women that I'm meeting who have such high potential in these parenting classes my husband and I would teach. We'd see these young couples, just so much potential. And I was kind of scared. I was like, I was a little bit intimidated. I'd done it with my own children a lot. And yet taking that step with someone who was maybe 15, 20 years younger than me, you know, but a grown adult, it felt a little scary. And so, while expert culture is important for some things, surgery, yes, engineering, I would not want to work on a car engine, or, you know, I could not be a chemical engineer. But there's a lot of things in life that we can do. And for sure, one of those things is to help one another trust and follow Jesus. I mean, it's by design. Like he calls us a body. He calls us a family. A family culture is not expert culture. Family culture is commitment culture and covenant culture. And so I would just say, you don't have to be an expert. What I found was my daughter, who was maybe doing second grade work, could help my son, who was a kindergartner. Even sometimes. So, you just have to be a couple of steps ahead sometimes of somebody else. And sometimes that's even better than being 30 steps ahead.
Yes.
There's some benefits to that. Yes.
I tell younger folks that I'm discipling just that very point, that I can communicate something. So, you know, it's myself discipling someone else, and then there's a third person that's maybe just coming into the community, just coming into the faith. And I try to communicate to this younger person that I'm discipling that this third person is going to receive things from me in a certain way, maybe even with a greater amount of deference, because perhaps there's an age gap. Maybe I'm 20, 25 years older than this person. And so they're going to listen to me maybe at a different level than they listen to you. But when they see you reading your Bible, praying, sharing your faith, making difficult choices to obey when it would be easier to just take the easy way out, and to fudge the numbers on something, that hits in many ways more powerfully, because sometimes when there's this big gap between myself and a mentor that I'm learning from, it can be hard for me to see how I could necessarily follow directly in their footsteps. But when there are people who are sort of in between the older mentor, leader, and where I'm at as a young disciple, well, I can kind of see the pathway or the trajectory, if that makes sense. It's almost like connecting the dots. I can see the next steps that I need to take. So, just being a few steps ahead is qualifying in terms of sharing your faith with someone else.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, I'm trying to decide where I want to go from here. What are some of the things that you look for as a mentor, as an older believer who's wanting to share your faith with a younger generation that the Lord has brought into your life?
Yeah, I have a little rubric or filter that I use, but I will say at first that it's not just that I want to share my faith with younger people, it's that I am required to. So if I'm going to walk in obedience with Jesus, Scripture clearly teaches that the older women are to teach the younger women, older men are to teach the younger men. And Paul even lists out, here's some things I really want you to focus on. Teach them to respect their husbands, teach them how to run their home, teach them how to love their children and raise them. And so for me, it's fundamentally the initial impetus is obedience. And so whether I want to or not, that is something that I need to do. That being said, what fun. This is one of the funnest things that I've ever experienced outside of, my own little family of 4 when we were raising them. So what I do is Renew had a great tool to kind of help us when we were first learning, like, hey, what is discipleship? What are we even doing here? They said, well, you're just looking for people who are faithful, available, teachable, and reliable. Or you can do the acronym RAFT. So I'll do it that way. It's easier to remember. So are they reliable? Do they show up when they say they're going to show up? Do they, can you count on them that when they say something's going to happen, they actually make it happen? Are they available? So we're super busy.
Yes.
In America. And a lot of times we think that we don't have any volition over our schedules, that we have to do all of these things. And one of the things that Bonnie and I say on our podcast all the time is, moms, put everything on the table. You're the grown-up in the room. You can swipe it off if you find that it's not best for your family. It might be good, but is there something better out there? So are they available? I've had young women call me and say, will you come meet with me? I want to get to know you and I want some help. And yes, the answer is always yes. And we start to look at calendars. I had one just this fall, 6 weeks before we could meet for one meeting.
Right.
Which I was happy to give her, but that's not going to work. That's not discipleship. That's just a coffee meeting to give you some encouragement. So you got to be available on a really regular basis, preferably weekly. So reliable, available, faithful. So faithful is similar to reliable, but do they, if they know the Lord, do they try to put their beliefs into action? If they don't know the Lord, are they a faithful friend? Do they exhibit qualities of faithfulness, which is not just belief, right? I mean, even the demons believe, but they don't have faith. So it's kind of a belief put into action, kind of a quality. And then teachable. I'm looking for teachable hearts. We always talked about this when I was raising my kids, that you need to guard your heart and you don't want to be wise in your own eyes. Are they open to instruction? And I always call that the eager puppy look. You'll know it when you see it. You see someone who's just so eager to learn. They're like this little puppy dog. Yep. It's just like, yes, I'm so excited. There's this energy there. So that's what I'm looking for. And my husband and I were seeing these couples again and again in our parenting classes. They had all these qualities. And through the years, we found more and more of them did not have their own parents to play this role in their life, whether that was because of divorce or an unhappy marriage that stayed intact. Maybe they were unbelieving parents, so many different reasons. But at some point in the last, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years, we hit a tipping point where that was more often the case than not.
Right.
So there was greater than half of the couples in our class who didn't have parents, which meant grandparents of their children, to really use as a resource to disciple them, or they'd actually never been discipled by them, or they didn't want to ask their mom, which is why why Bonnie and I started that podcast, because they couldn't ask their moms, or they didn't want to ask their moms. So that's what I'm looking for when I'm looking for somebody. Now you don't, I mean, I do want to put out there a little caveat that we're not looking for superstars. We're looking for everyday people. And some of these qualities, maybe you see even as potential in them. But, if they don't have the ability to show up regularly when they're going to say to, if they're not available, it's probably just not going to work.
Right. And I think that's an important point, that this isn't necessarily a judgment, a moral judgment that's being passed. It's just, is this going to actually even work to pass on the faith and to be in a mentoring relationship with this younger believer if they don't have these qualities or aren't willing to develop them? I do think you're right that we're busier than ever, and that's true for all of us, whether we've been walking with the Lord for decades or whether we're in our early 20s and just trying to figure out marriage and family. But I think it's always been the case. If you look at Jesus when he called people to follow him, I think he did that all the time, and we only get certain insights, or we only get certain vignettes of him calling someone to follow him. But in virtually every case, someone had to leave something in order to follow Jesus. So, with the first disciples, they left their nets and they followed Jesus. A little bit later, when Matthew is called, he left his tax table to follow Jesus. John and James, they left their father with the workers in the boat. And I think it's part of calling others into this life of discipleship, that your picture of, swiping the things off the table, that one of the big obstacles to discipleship these days is just we're overcommitted with our schedule, and we're not available. So I think it's good for us to have those 4 qualities or those 4 areas in mind, and then realize, like you said, we're not looking for someone that's necessarily got it all figured out to start, but someone who's willing to develop and to make themselves available.
Absolutely. And you will find them. I mean, you will find them more and more. I think this is the way forward for the church. A lot of young families that we talk to realize we got to get smaller. We got to get smaller and smaller and smaller, because we are standing within a culture that is actively discipling us in ways that are very counter to the ways of Jesus. And so we're going to have to be more and more intentional with our time and our friendships and our extracurricular activities if we're going to hit a tipping point where we've got more face time with the people that are really going to pour into us in good ways than with the world. It's quality time, but it's also quantity. Children need both. Children need quality time with you, but they also just need quantity time.
Right.
They just need to be with you.
I can't remember who said this recently, but they basically said that the birthing place of quality time is quantity time. So you can't just say, I'm going to get with my children X amount of times and it's all going to be quality. It's just not the way life works. So,
amen.
So I agree that we just have to have, in sports, it's, if you're playing soccer, it's how many shots on goal. If you don't get very many shots attempted, you're probably not going to score very many goals. It's just the way life works. Mm-hmm. So could you share a little bit more about your and David's? So where do you tend to meet these? I'd love to hear more about just your personal, everyday, week in, week out life there and ministry. Where are you finding yourself meeting younger folks who want to learn and who want to spend time with you and be discipled? Well,
we mostly are finding them within our local church. I mean, I think anybody listening to this or watching this could say the same, like that this journey never ends. When am I done needing to be discipled? Never. So you will always have people available. That being said, for us, because our ministry was so much in parenting and families, that's what we found. And we thought, okay, let's take the 5 who are your 5 from that class? And I would say my 5, and they pretty much just matched up, and we're like, all right, you take the husbands, I'll take the wives. And then we'll bring them all together as well. And so, but I think best practices is also inviting someone who doesn't know the Lord, and you have to be out in the world to find someone. Typically, they're not coming to our churches, and so. Right. One of the Renew has a great leaders guide. I just printed it off in light of this conversation. I've seen this in other forms through the years, but this leaders guide for the Real Life Theology Handbook kind of says as much. They said you really want people in all stages of development. They draw a wheel, and you from not born again all the way around, and you want to start with somebody being your apprentice. So maybe someone you think, okay, this person's got really great potential, and probably in about 12 months in this process, I could turn them loose to go do their own group, which is kind of moving away from the question you asked, where do you find? But I think really, who do you like to be around? Like, don't make it hard on yourself. These were delightful young couples who we had, I think, 12 or 14 weeks with. Every week we saw they came most all class times, to the parenting class. They'd stop us afterwards. They'd ask us questions. We could see that look in their eye. There was the eager puppy look. There was the sheer terror look of like, you got to help me with this parenting thing. I don't know what I'm doing. So there was a lot of hunger there to learn, that teachable heart. And so we just went from there. We just said, okay, let's give this a try. And I think I said in the talk you came to listen to, Andrew, an ounce of obedience is worth a pound of theology. And we just kind of took that to heart and just said, let's give it a try. Instead of trying to dump a bunch of information in our brains and know everything about the process, let's just go learn as we go. And so we took those people from our class at church. And now we call them dear friends, like, for life. They're going to be our dear friends, even as we move into maybe a new discipleship group.
Yeah. How does that work for you all? So my own background is that a lot of my life has been in the military community. And so there's always coming and going as folks are being moved around from one assignment to the next. My wife and I have now moved into a place where we're in more of a static community. And it's great, but it's completely different. The church we're a part of has people that have been there for 30 plus years, which is mind blowing to me, because it just hasn't been our experience. But as someone who has had more of an experience in that type of setting, how does it look to graduate people, so to speak? You just talked about, hey, in 12 months, we can sort of cut them loose. But how do you do that when? Is that a challenge to get people to kind of step out from under your tutoring and your leadership, and how do you address that?
Yes, it's really hard because you grow to become like dear friends, dear friends. And I'm just in the process of kind of releasing that first group, who I'm not going to turn completely loose. I'll be honest. We're going to still have them in our home once a month. Because they are, and we're going to do play dates in my backyard like we have before, and go swimming and that kind of thing. Because there are people now. That being said, I think we're about 3 to 4 years in with this first group, which is a little bit long in the numbers. I think you can do what you are sensing God wants you to do with a group, but I do think that you will do better if you start with an apprentice who can be like your co-leader. Like when you can't be there, if you're sick, you already have somebody who can lead it, which I would do. As I got to know them, I would say, hey, I'm not going to be able to be there. I want y'all to meet. You run it. My husband would do the same thing with the men. We're going to be traveling. I want you to meet. This person run it. Also, though, having a set amount of time helps people say yes. So, right. Which we did. We said 12 months. And then at the end of the 12 months, we looked at each other and we're like, we feel like we're just getting started here. Like, we feel like there's a lot more to go. And so I gave everyone the ability to say, I'm done,
Right.
or I would like to continue. And a couple stepped away, which is great because they did the 12-month commitment.
Right.
And then we took on some new ones. And then at the end of every year, we kind of re-up and say, would you like to continue on? But after 3 to 4 times of that, I really do think it's time for me to push the little chicks out of the nest.
Right.
And say, and some of them are already like having a group in their homes of young moms, and they're already starting to do that themselves with maybe a co-leader. So when you say that from the beginning, it's feelings are hurt less. Because you're right, military community, I'm like, oh, built-in rotation. That actually sounds great on some levels because it's really hard to stop meeting with people that you love, but you know that things change, seasons of life change, and group dynamics change. So it's good to kind of do a refresh.
I really agree with that wisdom, and I appreciate you sharing that. Those are some practical mechanics, I think. I do really like the idea of building in a deadline, so to speak, even if it's just arbitrary, 12 months. There's nothing magical about that. Yeah. But it's sort of from day one. I think Jesus did that when he said, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. It may not have been a quantitative amount of time, but it was from the very beginning, following him was going to lead to a different state of being, that they weren't just following him indefinitely. They were going to follow him for a period of time, and then they were going to actually join him in his work. You know, he was fishing for men in that story, and they were going to become like him in that sense. And then, like you said, it gives you a chance to have an off-ramp for people, whether that's because they just aren't wanting to move forward at the same rate, or because they got it, they're ready to go out and actually take that and offer it to someone else. It's good to have that. I think that is a challenge. One thing that we talked about is just how family is such a great parallel to this ministry of disciple making. And I think if the more you reflect on it, the more insightful and helpful it can be. And I think this is one of the dynamics of spiritual parenting or passing on the faith to the next generation is you're always going to have a part to play. Like even with your children, you've got some grandchildren now. You're still part of your children's lives, and you're part of their children, of course, as a grandparent. But it is different. Like you're wanting them to step out and really create their own family, and not necessarily still be living under your roof, because that's part of healthy maturity. And I think it's very similar spiritually, that we want people to come into their own, so to speak, which doesn't mean we're completely out of the picture. It just, the dynamic changes.
It does. And so I'm in one of the, I guess I didn't really go into the process of how you kind of, what you do with the group, but the very beginning is prayer and fasting. I mean, that's best practices for, so many parts of our lives. And so if you're not sure who to ask, I would just say, ask God, show me the people you want to bring to me, and then just sit and listen. And I did that the other day. I just was like, okay, who's next? And I prayed. I'm in the middle of a fast, New Year's fast with a group of us. And it was kind of like taking dictation. This person's name came to mind, and this person's name, and then this person's face. And I couldn't remember their name, but I was like, okay, make a note and find out who that is. And then maybe ask some of them if they have someone in their life that doesn't know the Lord, that could be a part of it. I think that would bring, my first group has not had that, of young moms. And I think that would bring a really cool dynamic, because sharing your faith fresh to someone with fresh eyes and fresh questions, it helps us, but it also brings us joy. I mean, there's so much joy. My best friend from childhood, that's kind of her main focus. She lives in the Nashville area. She works with Chinese students who come to Vanderbilt to study. And she's like, nothing brings me more joy than to tell someone about Jesus who's never heard of them. And I'm just in awe of her. They have a million questions, a million questions. And yeah, she doesn't have all the answers. They go looking together. And so her group is predominantly people who don't know Jesus, and then maybe one or two who do, which is a real different flavor. But I would just encourage people. That's probably a gap in my first experience. I just kind of took people who knew the Lord in various stages of maturity, and we didn't have that very beginning born again, not born again, needing to be born again. But yeah, there's so many cool things you can do with your group. But can I go into best practices for that?
Please.
Because I think that, again, I thought about discipleship because of my upbringing as mostly content transfer, like dump some knowledge in the brain. We're brains on a stick, right? That's how Westerners think of ourselves a lot. Like, we just cram enough information in there, we'll be transformed. And while there is an element of that, I've got the circle here that's super helpful. They suggest, and I would say I've found this to be true, that you do at least 3 times a month, if you're meeting weekly, of learning. So there's some content you're going through. And then you are also eating together, serving together, and then resting or Sabbathing together. And maybe not every single week. Like, we ate once a month together. We maybe served once a quarter together. And then we would do like a retreat, maybe just an overnight retreat. One year we even just did it here at my house, because it was like a big sleepover. It's so fun, because it was like hard for people to get away. And so we just decided to stay in town, and the guys took the kids. So, so you want this, basically what you want to do is you want to do life together. Right. And so again, I just say, do what you love. And, I love to cook. So a date night for my people was one of the things we were going to do, but we were going to be intentional with the date night. I was going to cook the food, and it was going to be elaborate, because that's what I wanted to do. You don't have to do that. And they got a sitter, and we would have dinner, yes, and have a lot of fun. But then at the end, we would pray over one another and say, like, how we're really actually doing. You came prepared to really say, hey, here's how our marriage really is. Here's how I really am. And then we're going to pray over you. And that was a way to just combine some intentionality with something I love to do anyway, which was having people into our home. Serving can be as simple as making cards, with the children for a nursing home, or going to serve at like the local food pantry, or at the church somehow. Just some sort of service where we kind of get out, and your group members, a lot of times have some sort of passion. One of our moms is really passionate about helping people at the holidays, and her boys will raise money, and they'll buy household goods, and she'll just involve not only our group, but other people. So allowing the people in the group who have different giftings to kind of drive some of that is also good, because you're pushing it to them, and they're taking it. So learning, eating, serving, and resting together is important.
I hear you saying that you want to identify the right people. So you're praying and fasting, and you're just being alert to the folks that the Lord is already bringing into your life. You also want to create, I guess I would just say, rhythms where you have regular time together, weekly, as a group, as a community. And then these 4 things that you just mentioned in the circle, in terms of when you're together with those people, these are 4 ways of being together and sharing life together. So maybe just recap those 4 again. Yeah.
So learning. So the Real Life Theology Handbook is a great place to start if you're not sure where to start. That was not available years ago when I started doing this. And so, we did something else. I just asked them, what do you want to do? And they're like, we need to learn boundaries. So we did the Boundaries book by Henry Cloud and Townsend, I think, is the authors.
Yep.
And actually, let me just put a pin in that for a second and say, prior to diving into the learning, one of the best practices that Renew taught me was to do a testimony when you first get together with your group. So you kind of model this as the leader, and you tell them this is what we're going to do to get to know one another. It's going to give you in a couple of 3 weeks what 6 months of meeting together would have given you when you do this practice. It so advances your intimacy and helps you understand where people are coming from. You basically just draw a line on a piece of paper and divide the line into decades. And you just chart 4 to 5 places where you've had critical things happen in your life. And if you're walking with Jesus, you are supposed to add how you saw God work in that moment or through that situation. If you're not walking with Jesus, you can guess maybe how God was there, or you can take a pass on that. But you model it, you do it for 30 minutes so to keep it tight, because we can't go on for hours here, or we're going to be meeting for the first 2 months with testimonies. Right. And then you pick 2 people and say, okay, next week, you, I want your testimonies, and they'll go 30 minutes. And it's just like kind of this wow moment. You find out significant hurts in people's past, woundings.
Yes.
You find beautiful, happy God moments as well. And it just helps you. It just helps you understand one another.
Okay, so I haven't done this practice, but you shared this actually on the stage, I think, in Nashville, and I was super intrigued. So I'm glad that you brought it up here today. So just so I understand, you're getting together for the first time, and you've already alerted people that, hey, this is part of what we're going to be doing when we get together. You actually carve out 30 minutes during that time together. Everyone separates, they've got their piece of paper, and they're mapping their life on this timeline.
Nope. You do it when you're at home, and you come prepared.
So before you show up on...
you got to think about it. It's kind of heavy. And depending on your faith background, you may be comfortable with a testimony. Your church may have been like, hey, you need a 5-minute testimony, a 2-minute testimony, a 30-minute testimony. But if you're not, this is a new thing for you. And so I would never spring it on somebody. I just said, I'm going to model it.
Okay.
And then I'm going to release you this week, and you're all going to have to do it. So if you want to go ahead and start, but I would just say ahead of time, go home, you come back next week, prepared to do it.
Okay.
And then you and you and you and you. And we had too big of a group probably, but again, I was new. We had like 8 or 9 women. Right. So that was several weeks, probably 4 or 5 weeks that we were doing that.
Every week that follows on, those 2 folks are actually sharing. They've got 30 minutes to share their story that they've taken the time to map out.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah.
And let me just say, this was when they had babes in arms and preschoolers. So we met at the church where a hall could be closed off at both ends, and the kids were literally running up and down the hall while we were meeting in the room. I mean, it's not ideal, but again, actually doing it is better than having the perfect environment to do it in.
That's right.
So that's what we did. Now, this many years down the road, most of those kids are in school. So, meetings are different. Right. But yeah, that was how we started. And then we moved into the Boundaries book and went from there. But that's the learning part. You want me to finish out the others?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So the eating together, that can be simple, being at a restaurant or whatever. For me, I wanted it to be, I wanted to bless them with a date night, because I remember it was expensive to go on dates when we were young, and we could either pay a sitter and then just go out and talk somewhere, or we could have free babysitting and actually go on a date. So I remember those days. So we wanted to bless them with like a free but really nice dinner. And so we would do that. And again, but we would finish in prayer, and it would be, they wanted to stay out. They're young. They come. And they're here at 5:30. Stay till like 9:30. I'm like, okay, y'all. I'm tired. I need to go to bed. Yeah. So it was a big, fun night. People were excited to come. We'd book out, several months in advance, so people had it on their calendar. So that's the eating part. Serving is just wherever you want to serve. I mean, it can be a local community kind of a place, or it can be in your own church. Again, what are you passionate about? What are the people in your group passionate about? It's always great to pass off responsibility. So you could have one of your group members say, hey, I'll figure it out, and we'll go there. And then the last one is, resting, Sabbathing together. So one of the things I've just started doing is I take my Sabbath in the middle of the week, because Sunday's not really restful for my husband and I. We teach and we have lunch obligations and we're going. So middle of the week for me, Wednesday is a Sabbath. And Bonnie and I recently interviewed a bunch of grandmothers and great-grandmothers for our podcast. And one of the things that kept coming up was Sabbath. Like Sunday was Sabbath when they were young. And I mean, everything stopped. You just went home from church. You sat out in the yard in your chairs. You had lunch and everybody hung out. Literally everybody just hung out. And so I took their wisdom and said, okay, I'm going to open my kitchen on Wednesday mornings, and I'm just letting I'm casting a broad net. Young women, middle-aged women, older women. I'm sending out text invitations to all of them, and I'm saying we're going to Sabbath together. But you know who shows up with regularity is my discipleship group. Because I'm already in their lives and we're already meeting. And so they are here. So that's part of a new way of Sabbathing, and it's kind of working really well. I'm not even making you coffee. The Nespresso machine's right here. You can come in, make yourself a cup of tea, make a cup of coffee. It's not an entertaining thing. There's no biscuits. There's no donuts. It's literally the bonus room upstairs is available for your children. If they're little and need to be around us, they can just be at our feet. We're just resting together. There's no agenda. Just come and enjoy some fellowship. Oh my goodness. It's so needed. I need it. My husband was telling me last year, he's like, Renee, you never Sabbath. Like you do something every single day of the week. And he's like, I'm concerned about that. And so in order to respect my husband, which could be a whole nother podcast, to listen and not discount the wise advice of your husband, I was like, okay, how am I going to help myself have the discipline to stop and rest? And I thought, well, if I have to be here available to open my front door when somebody walks in, I'll just be here. And so it's every Wednesday, and that's the rest portion of it. And so I would just say, get creative, ask God, like, how can I build this and put this together? Hopefully all the ideas I throw out today are not, you have to do it this way. Don't hear it that way. It's just, it can be this way. But it can also be your way. God's infinitely creative.
Yeah. I think that's definitely what I'm hearing as we walk through some of the practices and principles of making disciples and sharing your faith and mentoring others, is that it is an adventure, and the path is going to reveal itself as you move forward. And so I hope folks are encouraged that they're surrounded by opportunities, they're surrounded by needs, and especially if you've been walking with Jesus for a little while, there are younger believers who need the encouragement and the involvement of your life with them. And there's so many ways to do it. You're going to get better as you do it, but you have to start. You have to actually begin reaching out and initiating and learning as you go. And the Lord will, I think the Lord delights in using us in our inexperience and in our, the perfection is the enemy of progress. And I think that is very true when it comes to making disciples and sharing our faith. So, but it's helpful to have some ideas of where to start. And I think you've given us a lot of those. So I appreciate it.
One other last idea I will say is, if you're nervous, invite a friend, which is exactly what I did. I was scared to do it by myself. And so I invited my friend Bonnie, and I said, will you come be like my co-leader? And she did. And 12 months in, she's like, you don't need me. I'm out of here. Peace out. See you later. And so she did. After 1 year, off she went. And so but that was great fun. Like, I so enjoyed seeing my dear friend once a week. Who doesn't love to see, we need to see more of each other, not less of each other. So invite a friend. It's fine. It's fun.
Yeah. Well, Renee, if folks want to connect with you, is it the podcast? What's the best way for folks to learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah. So I've got, I'm always kind of surprised where the content is because most of my stuff, when I do it, I'm like, yep, just use it however you'd like. So you can find me on discipleship.org. There's some content on there, renew.org. I've got a ton of articles on there and some audio or video content. Justaskyourmom.com is our podcast website, and Just Ask Your Mom is our podcast. You can find it on Spotify, Apple, lots of different platforms, and that's a fun one. You can go look, and there's something for everybody, from babies to teens and adult children, and like I said, even grandparents. We hope that that's fulfilling in a kind of a fun, creative way, that Titus 2 instruction for the older women to instruct the younger women. We say we've learned some lessons and made some mistakes in our times as mothers, and so we just want to be as transparent as possible and encourage. We call ourselves cheerleaders, cheering on that younger generation.
Well, I appreciate you coming on today and being a cheerleader, especially on this topic. I do think, even as we were talking, there were several trails I would have loved to have gone down, and maybe we can do that in a future conversation. But thank you so much for coming on today and sharing with us.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.